The Wii was released in 2006, and it's one of the first consoles I played that had motion controls. The main controller for the system featured a built-in accelerometer and infrared detection that allowed the user to control a game with physical motion. Using movement to control a video game was one of the most intuitive aspects of the console, which quickly introduced a brand new audience that would have never touched a more traditional controller. The face of the controller features an A button, D-pad, plus and minus button, and a 1 and 2 button, as well as a B button placed on the backside. The system also came packed with a nunchuck that could be attached to the bottom of the Wii Remote, which featured a traditional analog stick and a Z and C button. The home button on the Wii Remote could be used to navigate through the system menu, which had a wide variety of software that you could download. This addition alone made the Wii pretty versatile, allowing users to download and play a wide variety of NES, Super NES, and Nintendo 64 games, with the Wii itself being backwards compatible with the GameCube. The hardware of the system was pretty impressive for the time, but now that the dust has finally settled, I feel like the Wii was kind of disappointing. We can all talk about how amazing the system was, but for me personally, I buy consoles to play video games, and I can't think of a lot of Wii games that I really enjoy. Now, there's a lot to talk about, but I can't talk about my disappointment before talking about my expectations. When you purchase a Nintendo console, you're essentially making a two-way deal with Nintendo. This non-verbal agreement is made when purchasing any Nintendo console, and it can be described as such. If you decide to purchase a Nintendo system, Nintendo will provide you with a wide variety of their games that you'll want to play. You are absolutely guaranteed to get a Mario game. You will always get a Zelda game, and you'll always get Mario Kart. This is the trinity of games that Nintendo will absolutely have to provide. You'll also get a wide variety of games made by Nintendo, which may or may not include Yoshi, Kirby, Donkey Kong, Metroid, Star Fox, Pokemon, and Super Smash Bros. And since Captain Falcon is a Super Smash Bros. Character, you will not get F-Zero. You also may or may not receive sequels to some more obscure stuff, such as Pikmin, Animal Crossing, Paper Mario, and Fire Emblem. Nintendo might also release a brand new game that hasn't existed before, but that rarely happens and never factors into your initial purchase. The quality of all of these games may or may not be good, but they will be made and you will be able to purchase them. As a longtime fan, there's an expectation that you'll receive the kind of games that you'll enjoy, but there's also some risk involved. For example, just because they'll release a game from a specific series, it doesn't guarantee that it'll be the game that you wanted. Looking back, I would say the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube fulfilled this deal very well. I got a ton of games that I really enjoyed, and I love those consoles as a result. For the Wii, Nintendo released a ton of games from series that I do enjoy, but I kind of feel like they dropped the ball. Most of the games that Nintendo made on the Wii were kind of mediocre, and as more time passes, I don't really have fond memories of the system. When I really think about it, most of the time I spent on the Wii was playing through GameCube and Virtual Console games. So while I don't really regret my purchase for the console itself, I feel like I got the short end of the stick. Now that you know where I'm coming from, let's talk about the actual video games. When the system launched, there were essentially two games worth playing. One of those games was Wii Sports. This game was easily one of the most influential games for the system. I would go as far to say that if Wii Sports did not exist, then the Wii would not have been nearly as successful. It was a free game that came packaged with the Wii, and it perfectly demonstrated the motion control technology to everyone who bought the system. The entire game was an incredibly simplistic game where you could play tennis, baseball, bowling, golf, and boxing. I mean, that's about it, but it was really fun. It's basically a glorified tech demo that shows off the motion controls, but the novelty of the technology was what made it stand out during the time. Motion controls are kind of a joke nowadays, but back in the day, people were losing their shit over it. You would just swing your arm to hit the ball, and it would just work. That shit's fucking crazy! The second game worth playing at launch was The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. This game was released on the GameCube as well, but I always considered the Wii version to be the definitive experience. So even when the GameCube version was released, I was waiting patiently to play it on the Wii so I could get the best experience possible. But I could never get one! For about a couple of years after the Wii launched, it was basically impossible to get. You could not find it on the store shelves, it did not fucking exist. Meanwhile, I was going to this private Catholic school during the time with all these rich assholes who somehow managed to get one. And they're talking about how fucking amazing Wii Sports is. It was pissing me off. Like, do you not know there's this next-gen amazing Zelda game you could be playing right now? All these dumb fucks are stealing all the Wiis and not even playing Zelda. I spent so much time and energy just trying to track down a Wii, and after about 7 months of frustration, my entire family pitched in some money and bought it off a scalper. Like, we didn't give a fuck. And you know what? It was worth every penny. Twilight Princess was an amazing Zelda game, and it was everything I wanted. Another great game for the Wii was Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. It's just another Metroid Prime game, but I still had a great time with it. The best thing about this game is that you could aim by using the sensor bar, which gave you an extreme amount of accuracy. Besides that, it's just Metroid Prime again, which is fucking awesome, because that's all I wanted. One of the best games on the console, hands down, was Super Mario Galaxy. It's another fantastic 3D Super Mario game that doesn't rely too much on motion controls. You use the sensor bar to pick up star bits, and you can do a little spin move by shaking the controller, but besides that, it's another Super Mario game where you go through the levels and collect the stars. All the new gravity mechanics really made it stand out amongst the other games in the series, and it's still worth playing today if you've never gotten around to it. It's a masterpiece. Genius shit. Another one of my favorite games on the Wii was WarioWare Smooth Moves. Out of all the WarioWare games, this one is probably my favorite because it used the motion controls with the mini games in a way that actually added to the experience. As the speed of the game increases, you're constantly switching the position of your controller, dealing with whatever the game throws at you, and it's just a beautiful clusterfuck. I could never really recommend this game to anyone, but I still think it's pretty fun. Now, some of you might be confused. Sam, you seem to like a lot of these games. You said the Wii was disappointing. Well, those are pretty much the only games I really like. So now that most of the good games are out of the way, let's talk about the more mediocre stuff. A perfect example of a mediocre game is Pokemon Battle Revolution. It's essentially like the old Pokemon Stadium games, except with even less single player content. And considering how bare bones those old games were, that's really bad. Not only is it a terrible Pokemon Stadium game, but it's also a huge step down from the traditional RPGs made on the GameCube. It's really the worst of both worlds. You get the initial disappointment of this game not being like Pokemon Coliseum, but then you get another wave of disappointment for it being worse than Pokemon Stadium. There's fucking nothing to do. It's just a waste of money. Now, if we want to talk garbage, Donkey Kong Barrel Blast is just a giant piece of shit. It's fucking embarrassing. I didn't even buy this, but it's just so terrible that I have to mention it. This was initially a GameCube game that used the Donkey Konga bongos, but then they delayed it for the Wii and made it so you couldn't use the fucking bongos, even though the console is backwards compatible. So you're just flailing your arms with the motion controls to hit your Donkey Konga bongo jetpack that you are no longer using, racing all these other Donkey Kong characters, and it's just so fucking terrible. Who thought this was a good idea? Like, they made 3 Donkey Kong rhythm games with a fucking bongo, then they're like, you know what we really need? Fucking retarded ass Donkey Kong on a fucking bongo jetpack. It's so fucking lame! Also, what the fuck, Nintendo? What is this spin-off bullshit? Where's Donkey Konga 3? Listen, fuck Mother 3. I made a fan translation of all the Donkey Konga 3 songs. I did some sick Smash Mouth remixes. You can have it. Just take it. Did Cranky Kong make the Donkey Konga bongo jetpack? I'll never know! Fuck you, Nintendo! Release this game in the States already. Fuck. Now, those games were obviously shit, so let's stop messing around and get a little controversial. Let's start this off with Super Paper Mario. If you like this game, then that's perfectly fine, but I hate it. The first 2 Paper Mario games were some of the best games I played, establishing the series as an RPG with turn-based combat. But then they made Super Paper Mario, this really mediocre 2D side-scroller with barely any of the RPG mechanics that made the first 2 games special. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind when a game makes some changes, but they changed Paper Mario so much that's essentially another genre. It's not even a Mario RPG. Now, when I played this game back in 2007, I just thought that was a weird spin-off game, but this was considered a mainline Paper Mario game. It's fucking bizarre. Imagine how ridiculous this would be with any other series. Imagine playing through Super Mario 64 and Sunshine and absolutely loving them, but then when Nintendo releases Super Mario Galaxy, it's just Super Mario Kart. But it's not considered a spin-off, it's considered the next 3D mainline Mario game. People would lose their fucking shit. And you know what? That Mario Kart game could be the best fucking game of all time, but that's not the game I wanted. If you wanted to make a different game, just name it something else. If you just called it Mario and the boring fucking butterfly, I wouldn't really care that much. But don't sell me on Paper Mario when you're not fucking making Paper Mario. There are some people who still think that Super Paper Mario can be considered a Paper Mario game because it has the quote-unquote charm, but I completely disagree. The most charming thing about the first two games was the turn-based combat, and none of that charm is present in Super Paper Mario. I know people give this game the benefit of the doubt because Sticker Star and Color Splash are just shit in comparison, but that doesn't change the fact that when Super Paper Mario was released, it was the worst game in the series. It's not absolutely awful, but it's the start of a downward slope that hasn't recovered since. Another game I don't care about that much is Mario Kart Wii. During the time, I thought that Mario Kart Wii was pretty interesting. It added a ton of new gameplay mechanics that made it stand out when compared to Mario Kart 64 and Double Dash, and it seemed like a great sequel. I had some fun with Mario Kart Wii back in 2008, but now that Mario Kart 8 has done everything Mario Kart Wii did, but better, it doesn't really stand out as much. Mario Kart 64 offers your classic Mario Kart experience with no bullshit, Double Dash offers 2 racers per kart with character-specific items, and Mario Kart 8 offers pretty much everything Mario Kart Wii does, with the addition of underwater, flying, and anti-gravity sections, better item balance, and a shit ton of fun DLC. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Mario Kart Wii is bad because Mario Kart 8 is better. What I am saying is that if I had a group of friends who wanted to play a fun game of Mario Kart, I'd rather play Mario Kart 8 than Mario Kart Wii. And if Mario Kart 8 isn't available, I'd rather play Mario Kart Double Dash. And if Mario Kart Double Dash isn't available, I'd rather play Mario Kart 64. And if Mario Kart 64 isn't available, like, fuck it. Let's play Super Smash Bros. One game that I found disappointing was Animal Crossing City Folk. The problem I have with this game is that it's basically just a port of Animal Crossing Wild World, which is kinda lame. Now, if you were a little kid who never played the earlier Animal Crossing games, then you would probably really love this game. It's not a bad game, but it's a game that pretty much added nothing to the series except this really small city area. After Wild World made huge improvements on the original game, fans were expecting the next giant advancement in the series, but City Folk didn't even try. So as someone who played the shit out of the previous games, City Folk was a pretty worthless entry to the series. One of the last great games on the Wii was Super Smash Bros. Brawl. This is the perfect example of a game that satisfied my expectations while also being a worthwhile inclusion many years later. When it was released, it delivered everything it promised while also delivering on the most ridiculous amount of single-player content I've ever seen. Out of every Super Smash Bros. Game to date, this is easily the most complete and definitive experience you can have. You might prefer to play Melee or Super Smash Bros. 4 with your friends, but none of those games will top the sheer quantity of content that Brawl provides. Sure, Brawl might be one of the worst games in the series if you want to force yourself to play competitively with a bunch of made-up restrictions and rules, but if I wanted to do that, I would just play a real fighting game instead. So even though I'd rather play the multiplayer with the latest game in the series, I think Brawl is a much better game overall, and probably the best Super Smash Bros. Game to date. So there's a couple of disappointments here and there, but overall the Wii's given me a lot of great games. Within the first couple of years after its launch, the Wii was looking to be another fantastic system by Nintendo, but then things started to shift in another direction.
Alright, bring the house down, guys.
Now, before I start, I just want to point out that this is entirely based off of fans' speculation, so excuse me while I put on my tinfoil hat. It doesn't take a genius to realize that Nintendo was trying to win over a new audience with the Wii. The Nintendo 64 and the GameCube weren't very successful consoles, and Nintendo was losing their market dominance to Sony and Microsoft. In order for the Wii to be successful, Nintendo had to do two important things. They first had to make a console that would appeal to a wider demographic, and then they had to create games that would appeal to their new audience. Nintendo believed that their motion control technology could help them win over a wider demographic, but there was a chance that it wouldn't work. Before they knew that the Wii would be a financial success, they began their work by making games for their hardcore demographic in order to give themselves a safety net. If I had to make a common link between all of my favorite games for the Wii, I would say that they all started in development before the Wii was released. By their nature, they kind of felt like games that would be on the GameCube, but Nintendo stopped making those kinds of games. At some point, Nintendo realized that the Wii attracted the wider demographic that they were trying to get. So in order to win over new players, Nintendo started to make all of their games appeal more towards their casual audience at the expense of its hardcore demographic. If I had to pinpoint when this shift happened, I would say it was sometime around 2008. The reason I think it's around 2008 is because there aren't that many games that Nintendo made past that year that I would call excellent. After 2008, most of their games were pandering to their casual demographic by streamlining their games to be mechanically simplistic, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you. Before we talk about the video games that I actually care about, let's start off with the Wii branded garbage, one of the most important ones being Wii Fit. This game came packaged with the Wii balance board, and it's essentially this giant plastic bathroom scale that would measure the force you exert on it. Wii Fit was essentially an elaborate scam by Nintendo to trick dumb fucks that they were losing weight by standing still. It was kind of an interesting idea, but I didn't care. This was borderline not even a video game. But of course, everyone just ate this shit up. It was all over the news, they had these elaborate demo booths where you could try it out, and it sold out incredibly fast. Another notable game was Wii Music, which is only relevant because of how embarrassing it is. I was getting pretty skeptical of motion controls, but this is the game where Nintendo eradicated my soul. This happened right when Nintendo was showing off the game live at their 2008 keynote, and it's such a fucking sadness. You have Miyamoto on stage, the man who helped create some of the best games of all time, using the Wii remote to play the most flaccid, pathetic version of the Super Mario Bros. Theme I've ever heard in my life. And it's just like, is this for fucking real? God, he's not even playing the drums. Are you fucking? One of the notable games that's actually warranted was Wii Sports Resort. The original Wii Sports was one of the best games that attracted everyone to the console, so a sequel is perfectly fine. The major addition to this game was the new method of control. Each game came packed with Wii Motion Plus, an add-on for the Wii Remote that basically improved the accuracy of the motion controls. The technology was pretty impressive, but I didn't give a shit. Motion controls initially seemed like this great advancement that would help deliver amazing games, but it was pretty clear by now that they were simply a gimmick. The infrared detection allowed for some really nice mouse-like precision, but the accelerometer was just a more complicated way to press a button. Some of the best games on the system rarely use the motion controls at all, while other games use them in situations where a button could do a better job. For the most part, the novelty of the control method didn't add anything to their games. So while the technology was pretty impressive, it was kind of hard to get excited about something that would most likely make their games worse. Besides that, it's fucking Wii Sports with more sports. Of course everyone bought this shit. It sold like gangbusters. It's not like any of this shit matters anymore. The company that made the GameCube no longer exists. Now it's all about releasing mediocre bullshit that you can sell to soccer moms. Like, fuck this stupid nerd shit. Let's have fun by pretending to fucking play instruments. Man, I did such a long workout by standing still. I should treat myself. Yes, can I get a double cheeseburger, large fries, and a Diet Coke, please? Don't worry, I just finished my rigorous Wii Fit workout by jogging in place in front of my TV. What the fuck is this goofy ass Looney Tunes shit? This is ridiculous. Where's Star Fox? Where's F-Zero? Nintendo, what the fuck are you doing? Now that we've talked about the Wii branded garbage, let's talk about the actual video games. One game that sold a shit ton of copies was New Super Mario Bros. Wii. It sold a lot of copies because it's incredibly safe and takes absolutely no risks. The visuals are incredibly bland, the gameplay is good enough, and you go straight through the stereotypical grasslands, desert, ice, water, jungle, mountain, sky, and lava world. Although the levels are brand new, it somehow feels like a completely derivative experience. There was almost a 20-year gap since the last 2D Super Mario game was released on a home console, and this was the best they could do? The problem I have with New Super Mario Bros. Wii is that it feels like Nintendo was making this game just to sell it to their casual audience. I don't have a major problem with that, but it's gone to the point where Nintendo is delivering a lazier product to appeal to the widest demographics possible. Some of the best games I played on Nintendo's earlier consoles were games that had clear, creative direction. Super Mario Sunshine, Majora's Mask, The Wind Waker. These were games with bold, artistic vision. So when Nintendo releases New Super Mario Bros. Wii, why do people just put up with it? They could have made one of the best 2D Super Mario games of all time, but they didn't give a shit. Apparently they wanted to bring the New Super Mario Bros. To console so they could include multiplayer, but then why is it so fucking terrible? Why do all the players bounce off each other like fucking jackasses? Why couldn't each character have different abilities like in Super Mario Bros. 2? Why did they add multiplayer without adding anything else to the gameplay? Meanwhile, I'm going back to the GameCube playing Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures, and it's a game that actually has some passion put into it. It's not just a top-down Zelda game with 4 links. You have to go through these levels and work with your friends solving puzzles while you're also collecting Force Gems to be right on top of the leaderboard. And then they added the Game Boy Advance connector, so you can look at the Game Boy screen and explore caves while your friends are exploring other rooms. There's a fucking reason why that game was multiplayer. The issue I have with this game is that they could have done something interesting. They could have at least given each character different characteristics or added some other kind of gameplay mechanic that would add to the multiplayer. But I can imagine that Nintendo decided to keep it simple to not scare off new potential customers. That's why a lot of Nintendo's games on the Wii feel so tame after 2008. Now that Nintendo has sold the Wii to this larger casual demographic, they're trying to sell them on their IPs by basically giving them dumbed down games that they would like. And apparently casual audiences really love 2D side-scrollers. Games like Kirby's Epic Yarn. It's another 2D side-scroller that's somehow even easier than New Super Mario Bros. Wii. It seems like Nintendo is covering all their bases. You get the fairly competent casual players with Mario, but with Kirby, you attract all the dumb little kids with the bright colors and yarn. To be fair, I actually don't mind that this game exists, because it's just another Kirby game. Now, believe it or not, I don't hate all mediocre 2D side-scrollers just for the sake of it. The Paper Mario series was a great turn-based RPG, but then they tried to release a shitty 2D side-scroller as a Paper Mario game when it wasn't a Paper Mario game. With the Super Mario series, Nintendo was putting out fantastic Super Mario games ever since the NES, but then they decided to sell the fuck out with New Super Mario Bros. Wii by releasing a game that's really uncreative and derivative. With Kirby, I have a completely different expectation. There are basically two different kinds of Kirby games. You have the traditional Kirby games where you go through a level and swallow and absorb the powers of your enemies, but then you also have a lot of one-off Kirby games that are really experimental. Sometimes Nintendo will be putting together some new game concept, and the game will be some bizarre shit, like a ball rolling around on the screen and you draw lines to control the ball and he plays the ball and draw lines and they're just like, what the fuck are we doing? What the fuck is this shit? Then they're like, fuck it, we'll just make it a Kirby game. Some of the best Kirby games have been the traditional games, but a lot of the experimental games are also really good. So for Kirby, they might put out a bunch of shit that I don't really care about, but it's usually not that terrible, and sometimes it's pretty good. Clearly, Kirby's Epic Yarn is an experimental game designed for little kids, so I can't really be that mad about it. After a certain point, you need to be able to have enough self-awareness to realize what you're getting yourself into. Remember when all those frustrated 35-year-old men were getting upset at Nintendo for releasing the 2DS, a device intended for kids below the age of 7? That was fucking embarrassing. Listen guys, I'm an old ass man. I just got the fucking Barbie Jeep Power Wheels. Couldn't even fit inside it. Hello, Fisher Price, what the fuck? After a certain point, you just look like an idiot. I don't fucking critique Blue's Clues for a reason. You can pretty much just look at the box and see that it's a fucking baby game intended for fucking babies. And if you like colorful and pretty graphics, then you'll love it. So while Kirby's Epic Yarn might be some simplistic bullshit, it's just not my thing. Speaking of Kirby, they also released Kirby's Return to Dreamland a year later. There's not much to say because it's just another Kirby game. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. It's Kirby, just more Kirby. Another game that a lot of people hated was Metroid Other M. To be honest, I don't really care about Metroid that much, so I'm not going to pretend that I hate this game, but Jesus Christ, everyone lost their shit over it. The worst complaint that I heard about this game is that it basically ruins Samus as a character. The simple act of just watching the cutscenes will ruin the entire game for you. They are so fucking terrible. The voice actor for Samus reads her lines in the most boring and emotionless way possible that it's just baffling. If that wasn't bad enough, Samus is basically told what weapons she can and can't use by this douchebag commander, and the entire game turns this badass bounty hunter into this fucking fragile, dainty little princess. They also sexualized the shit out of her and literally gave her fucking high heels. It's fucking ridiculous! I know people get pretty obsessed with proper female representation in video games, and personally, I don't give a fuck. But this shit is shameful. Apparently, the gameplay is actually pretty good though, even though it's once again a simplified game designed to appeal to a more casual audience. Am I the only one noticing this shit? They made a much more complex Metroid game back in 2007, but now we're suddenly making things a bit more retro now that Nintendo has this giant casual audience? Now, I'm not saying that Nintendo is doing this on purpose, but if I had a giant conspiracy theory about Nintendo dumbing down all their games, this would be a pretty weird trend. Then Nintendo released Donkey Kong Country Returns, which is another retro-inspired 2D platformer. Okay, they're doing this shit on purpose. 14 years since the last Donkey Kong Country game was released, and now we're getting one? Wow, isn't this some goddamn convenient timing? Nintendo suddenly has this casual audience who's never played video games in their lives, and now everything controls like a fucking NES game. Weird! But listen, it's actually different because this time it's a harder 2D platformer. Great. It's not like that matters though, because if you die too much, you can just activate the super guide and let the entire game play itself. That's right, Nintendo actually created a fail-safe that allows absolutely everyone to beat the game regardless of how terrible they are. After all, video games can be pretty hard. I mean, why bother learning how to play them? This has to be one of the most desperate things Nintendo has ever done. In their attempt to attract the widest demographics possible, they basically defeated the entire purpose of playing a fucking video game. To be fair, I heard this game is fun if you like Donkey Kong Country, but honestly, I just didn't care. It's hard to get excited about a brand new 2D side-scroller when Nintendo keeps putting them out. Now, there was one good game released after 2008, and that game was Super Mario Galaxy 2. This might seem like a game that would ruin my little conspiracy theory, but I think I have a good explanation. Nintendo's first step to marketing the Wii was to attract the widest demographics possible, and they achieved this with Wii Sports. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but Nintendo isn't going to survive as a company with Wii Sports alone, so they had to introduce this brand new audience to their actual video games. This is where the 2D side-scrollers come in. In a way, a lot of these games are a good and simple way to introduce someone to playing video games. Some of these games are more difficult than others, but they all mostly require the same amount of physical dexterity. You use one button to move left or right, you use another button to jump, and you maybe use another button to run or do another action. So, in order to introduce this brand new audience to their games, Nintendo created a lot of their games to be mechanically simplistic. They made them easy to learn, they allowed players to skip levels they couldn't complete, and they didn't add mechanics that would confuse the average player. For the most part, I think Nintendo did a very good job, but now they have to introduce their new players to more complicated games, which is where Super Mario Galaxy 2 comes in. Nintendo made Super Mario Galaxy 2 to appeal to their hardcore demographic, but they were also trying to introduce their casual demographic to 3D video games. The fact of the matter is that one of the most successful games on the Wii was New Super Mario Bros. Wii, outselling Super Mario Galaxy threefold. While Super Mario Galaxy is a much better game, it's also much more mechanically complex, which alienates a lot lot of players who might feel a bit intimidated. So in order to teach their casual audience, Super Mario Galaxy 2 shipped with a fucking DVD tutorial that teaches you how to play the game. This DVD came out in every region besides the US, and it tells you every single little detail on how to play the game, including how to plug in the fucking nunchuck into the Wii remote. I don't know why they bothered, because they also included the Super Guide anyways, which defeats the entire purpose of learning how to play the game. It's fucking ridiculous, but it just goes to show how hell-bent Nintendo was on attracting new players to their games. I'm not saying that my conspiracy theory is true, but what I'm saying is that it's true! It's so fucking obvious! They included a fucking DVD to teach you how to play a video game that's also a sequel! Who does that? Conspiracy theories aside, I heard a lot of people say that this game is better than the original, but I feel like Nintendo is kind of cheating. They essentially just borrowed a game they made before they started sucking dick and just made some more levels and power-ups. Objectively, it seems like a pretty fun game, and it's probably better than the original, but there's this cynical part of me that feels like Nintendo is just selling me the same shit again. As someone who loved the hell out of Super Mario Galaxy and collected every single star in the game with both Mario and Luigi, I didn't care enough to buy this game when it came out. The thing with Super Mario Galaxy 2 is that almost all of the novelty of the original is completely lost. That's why I've never wanted Nintendo to make direct sequels to their previous games, because I'd rather have Nintendo make something new instead of retreading old ground. One of the last games that completely killed the Wii for me was The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. This was the last game on the system that I actually cared about, and it was really disappointing. A lot of people have a ton of different problems with this game, but for me personally, none of them revolve around the motion controls. The main problem with Skyward Sword is that it's a Zelda game made by the same Nintendo that we've been dealing with past 2008. So of course, the game has a lot of hand-holding. Fi will never shut up and just let you play the game. The dungeons will literally tell you how to solve puzzles. The world is extremely tiny so players don't get lost. Each area in the game is incredibly linear. The story is just constant fetch quests with no end in sight. Skyloft is absolutely empty and devoid of anything interesting, and the entire game revolves around the player retreading old ground in boss fights to the point where it's not even fun anymore. Skyward Sword is just awful. It's truly the pinnacle of everything that was wrong with Nintendo during the time. Meanwhile, around the same week that Skyward Sword was released, Skyrim came out and blew it out of the fucking water. There was this giant vast world filled with all these interesting places and characters. You were free to explore the world and do whatever you want. You were going on an adventure, killing dragons and traveling to different towns, doing all sorts of different quests and constantly discovering new and exciting things. It was fucking awesome. Fucking Bethesda unintentionally made a game that felt more like Zelda than the actual Zelda game that just came out. I'm not even proud of saying that. These dumb fuck buffoons who put out these glitch-ridden, buggy-ass games managed to make a better Zelda game than Nintendo. It's just fucking embarrassing. Nintendo just became this shell of their former self. They were trying so hard to cater to their new audience that they completely lost touch with what made their games great. At the end of the day, I'm not saying that Nintendo's Wii games are outright terrible, but a lot of them are just alright. They're serviceable. If you decide to spend some time playing one of these games, you'll probably have a decent time with it. After a while, you'll beat the game and just say, huh? That was pretty fun, and then you'll put it down and never play the game ever again. Some people might be happy with that, but for me, that's not good enough. When I look back at games on the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube, they are some of the best games I ever played in my life. Games like Ocarina of Time, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Star Fox 64, Kirby 64, The Crystal Shards, Paper Mario, Majora's Mask, F-Zero GX, Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, Animal Crossing, The Wind Waker, Kirby Air Ride, Mario Kart Double Dash, Four Swords Adventure, Metroid Prime, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Smash Bros. Melee. All of these games are fucking amazing. I played and liked a lot of stuff on these consoles, but these are the games that I fucking love. This is masterpiece shit. So when I bought a Wii, these were the kinds of games I was looking to play, and Nintendo made a couple. They made Super Mario Galaxy, Twilight Princess, and Brawl. Those are the only games that I think are on par with everything else. Normally, that would be fine, but there was also a lot of games that I either hated or just didn't care about. I never played Other M because it was shit. I never played any of the Kirby games. I didn't care about Donkey Kong Country Returns. Skyward Sword was a huge disappointment. All the Wii branded garbage was just kind of mediocre and shitty. I didn't care about Super Mario Galaxy 2 because they were selling me the same shit again. I didn't care about Animal Crossing City Folk because they were selling me the same shit again. Super Paper Mario was just kinda shitty and it ruined the Paper Mario series for really no reason. New Super Mario Bros. Wii was really mediocre, and there's just so many games I didn't even mention that aren't worth mentioning. Games like Battalion Wars 2, Punch-Out!, again, Rhythm Heaven Fever, Big Brain Academy Wii Degree, another fucking Mario Party, another fucking Mario Party that's also really bad, more fucking Mario sports games, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games, Mario and Sonic at the London 2012 Olympic Games, Link's Crossbow Training. It's better than Skyward Sword. Now, I already know what you're going to say. What about all the amazing games made by third-party developers? Well, to be honest, I didn't play that many third-party games on the Wii, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One of the major problems with the Wii was that it was littered with shovelware. A lot of third-party developers saw the success of Wii Sports and followed suit by just releasing more mediocre trash to make a quick buck. Other third-party developers tried to release decent games that would appeal to a more hardcore audience, but they didn't sell that well because all the casual dipshits were just playing Wii Sports, and most of the hardcore Nintendo fans were just buying Nintendo games. There were some exceptions, but for the most part, the store shelves were just littered with garbage. Normally, I could rent some games and try to sift through the shit, but rental stores were already going out of business at this point, and there was already so much trash that it wasn't worth the effort. When I really think about it, the best thing about the Wii was that it gave me a lot of time to go back and play through older games that I missed out on the PS2 and PC. I know there's a couple of good games made by third-party developers, but most of my disappointment lies solely on Nintendo and the games that they put out. After all, the only reason I bought a Wii was to play the games that Nintendo made, and a lot of those games weren't as good as the ones on their previous consoles. So that's the Wii in a nutshell. If you bought the Wii as your first console, you might not have been as disappointed, but for me personally, I was going into it with some pretty high expectations. Nintendo was on track to making a console with some pretty great games, but then they started to make all their games for casual players and rested on their laurels. As a result, Nintendo's success with their casual audience was essentially a flash in the pan, motion controls mostly became a gimmick, and there aren't that many games that stand out. That's the Wii.